Let's do a King's Rest walkthrough. Okay, first, you want to have your entire party take on the appearance of a giraffe. This will be critical because why not? First thing you want to do in King's Rest, there's this pack of little void dudes that die instantly when you dispel them. So if you have an arcane torrent or a mass dispel on your priest, it's very easy to just group them up and pop a mass dispel, kill all of them instantly. And it the only thing you have to watch out for is if you get touched by one of them, you will get feared. So you need to make sure that you've got some kind of way to keep them from targeting you instantly. But if you have like a paladin that can bubble and run in an arcane torrent, or if you're, I think Shaq uses a AoE fear glyph to fear him first and then jumps in and arcane torrents to get rid of him. Then we grab all these guardians to kill them simultaneously, because they all do the same thing, which is just cast a cone in front of them that deals heavy damage. It's very easy to, you can outrange it, and if you have a group full of range, it's very easy to just have the range stand back, outrange the cone. It's obviously a bit more difficult if you're melee. You need to be dodging these, and they enrage at a certain point and start casting faster, significantly faster, and being able to see which direction they're facing when they're casting can be fairly difficult as ranged. So you want to be careful with these, because they will, on hierarchies, they will just one-shot you. So it's really annoying for the tank and any melee DPS that are in there. Also, it stuns you, so you can a lot of times get comboed where if you get stunned one time, then the next one casts on top of you and stuns you again, and you just get stun locked and die. But if you can get all of them dead quickly here, it saves a lot of time. So if you can pull off grabbing them all together, it's a nice time save. Now you move into this room and you activate the next phase of this room by clicking the gong up on the end of this room up here. And once that gong is clicked, then it advances, clears this room out of all the spirits, and you get the trash in here. Important to reapply the giraffe appearance if you died on the guardians. All right, now there's 4 packs in here. The mob that you want to be especially careful for in here is this Shadowborn Champion, because it will cast an enrage effect on itself, causing it to do significantly more damage. And if it's not dispelled, then it can be really nasty. Now you also want to pay attention. I'm going to rewind this for a second. You'll see here that there were another set of void spawns back here. These spawn after you started the fight, and they'll begin patrolling. They'll exist for a few seconds on the other side of the bridge, and then they'll start patrolling around the room. So you want to keep an eye on these when they spawn. You'll have a few seconds, and then they're going to come across the bridge, and you're going to want to have something ready to dispel them, to kill them, because if they get into your group, they'll start fearing people, and that's really bad. Now you can see this enrage effect that popped up on the Shadowborn Champion here. On his nameplate, the Shadowborn Champion, you'll see the enrage effect come up here. This means, and you can see his physical appearance, he gets big and red. That means the tank's about to start getting trucked. Now, as a druid, I can dispel that, but if you don't have a soothe in your party to get rid of that, then ideally your tank's probably just going to want to start running for their life at that point, or have a whole bunch of cooldowns ready to pop, which can be difficult because the trash pack hurts regardless, so you may not necessarily have that luxury of holding on to cooldowns. Also, you see these tornadoes get spawned in melee. I would recommend kiting the trash around at least a little bit. Once these tornadoes have spawned, they're static in their pathing, so if you pull the mob out from the tornado, this if it comes in contact with you, it leaves a dot on you. It knocks you and it leaves a dot on you that hurts. And it can be really frustrating for melee that are in there to have to deal with that. So once those tornadoes spawn, it's not a bad idea to move the trash a little bit just to get it out of that. You'll notice this tornado just spins in a circle where it's at. So if you pull that out a little bit, then it can make it significantly easier on melee. Now again, with this pack, you've got another Shadowborn Champion in here. So you want to keep track of when it's about ready to enrage. And you see there it gets big and red. That means it's mad. And again, we have Soothe. We had 2 druids in here that could Soothe, but if you don't have that, then this guy's going to hurt a lot, and you want to do everything you can to stay away from it as a tank if it's enraged. I would definitely recommend pulling... We pulled the first 2 packs together. I would definitely recommend pulling this one by itself because of the number of mobs in it. Trying to pull both these packs is pretty aggressive and difficult for the tank. And now for the final pack. And this one's not particularly threatening. And you also want to keep track, any of the Witch Doctors in here do a big AoE that needs to be interrupted. Or I think you saw earlier the group took a big old chunk of damage when this Shadow Bolt volley. If that Shadow Bolt volley isn't interrupted, it crushes the group, so definitely want to make sure that gets interrupted. That thing will hurt a lot. And then once all the mobs are dead here, then the boss will spawn, and it's going to spawn down here. So you want to make sure you're not accidentally standing on top of it when it gets ready to spawn. It'll spawn at the back of the room and then make its way around to the front. So probably be up on the platform here to make sure you don't accidentally aggro it. And there's the boss. And the boss is fairly straightforward, but you'll have a difficult time as a healer, especially on Tyrannical. The boss, you see the frames glow here. That's indicating that Spit Gold is about to come out on someone. Spit Gold is a dot that does significant damage, and when it expires, it leaves a puddle on the ground. You want to try to drop all the puddles on top of each other, because when the boss casts Lucre's Call, it's going to spawn ads from all these puddles. And you want all the ads spawned together because they can be CC'd in any number of ways. But you want to keep them clustered so that you can easily CC them as a group. Now, the reason this boss is hard is because this Spit Gold just comes out rapid fire. As soon as it falls off someone, it's going to be recast on someone else. And for any healer that doesn't have really significant single target healing, it becomes very difficult to stay on top of this dot and not have it kill someone. So this becomes a very significant healing check early in the dungeon to make sure that you can keep people alive through that dot. And you can see here the ads have started spawning, and you can use, like as a druid, I can use Ursul's Vortex or Typhoon to knock them back. Mages can drop like Blizzard on them to slow them. Lots of different ways you can keep these mobs CC'd. Any kind of root will keep them rooted. And worst case scenario, if the blobs cannot be CC'd for whatever reason, you can always just kite the boss away. You can see here Shaq has started to move the boss around the room to keep it away from these blobs. And so you can pretty much kite indefinitely. Obviously, don't stand in the AoE like I just did there. That's dumb, and it will hurt quite a bit. The boss does that occasionally. You just move out for that. And that's pretty much the mechanics for the fight. It's not a particularly complicated fight. It just hurts a lot. The Spit Gold is one of the more punishing boss mechanics in the game in terms of DPS. And especially if you're asked as the healer to help with CCing the mobs. Because that dot just stays out non-stop. I mean, it's pretty much just always up on someone. You get maybe 2 seconds between the Spit Golds to kind of recover, but the uptime on that dot is very considerable for the fight. So it will probably be your full-time job just trying to keep the person alive on high keys. Once the boss is dead, you move into the mini boss room in here. And this room is notable because it spawns randomly. The bosses activate randomly. So you could get this room in any order. There's 4 different sets of mini bosses. And there's no way of knowing which are going to come out first. Now this boss, so we got the close right pack. Now this one has 2 different mobs in it, the Queen Wasi and King Tamaji, I think. And the king has pretty much one mechanic, which is that he fixates someone and blade storms at them. And if you get hit by the Blade Storm, it will hurt a lot. And there's, I think he might be able to be like knocked when he's doing the Blade Storm, but not very many CCs work on him in that form. So mostly you just have to kite around and stay, try to keep him away from you. Then the Queen essentially has one big mechanic that she does, which is that she will seduce someone periodically. And the seduce mind controls the person. And they will need to be offensively dispelled. So if you have like a Shaman Purge or a Priest Magic Dispel, or if you have someone with like an Arcane Torrent, then that person can dispel them. Otherwise, that person's just going to sit. There is, so far as I'm aware, there's not like a mechanic to get them out of the mind control. There's no like DPS them below 50% or anything like that. They just sit in the mind control for so long as it's out until you can dispel them, or until it like wears off eventually, which I think is like 30 seconds or something really long. Now this next boss, Queen Patla and her Raptor, she puts essentially, like, she just shoots at the tank and it hurts a lot, but then she'll also drop purple puddles under people, and the purple puddles will deal damage, but it also has a slow component. And currently the slow component on this scales with the level of the key, which I believe to be a bug, and I expect to get fixed at some point. But the higher the key, the greater the slow effect of the purple puddle on the ground, to the point where you can get a key high enough to where you just can't move out of the purple puddles. So unless you have something like a blink or a disengage or a way to port to an ally like Shadow Step, you will just get locked into the purple puddle. So you want to be very careful about that. The purple puddle doesn't do a lot of damage, but it does do some damage, and if you don't have a way out of it, it's going to be very annoying. And then that Raptor jumps around and swipes at people, but mostly you just move away from him. The next boss is King Akul with a bunch of his agents, and he puts a poison effect on someone randomly. If you have the ability to dispel poison, you just dispel it and that's it. If you cannot dispel poison, then it becomes a much more annoying mechanic, because it drops green puddles periodically as it ticks, and the green puddles hurt and do a lot of damage. Like the dot itself does a lot of damage, so you have to keep moving as the poison drops underneath you, and you have to heal through the dot. So having someone in your party that can dispel poison is very helpful for this king. If you have a poison dispel, he's fairly trivial. If you don't, he becomes very annoying. His agents will periodically pick a random DPS or non-tank, I believe, and port to them, and you have to move out. It'll create a little purple swirly underneath you. You need to move out of it, or they'll hit you and it'll hurt. This last pack is 3 mini bosses that have abilities that need to be interrupted. The boss with the staff here in the middle, King Rahui, does a lightning ability, an AoE lightning ability that can be outranged if you want to, but it can also just be knocked, this channel lightning. The guard captain does an axe dot, it's physical damage that he throws out, and that just needs to be healed through. And then the seneschal does a heal that needs to be interrupted. So basically this is just a fight where you need to have multiple interrupts, or like an AoE interrupt that can lock these guys down, because that channel lightning is going to be an area of effect denial. It's going to keep you from standing near the guy, and the seneschal will heal everyone up if you can't interrupt him. You probably want to focus down the guard captain first, because of the 3, he's the only one whose effect cannot be stopped. Like that axe, the physical axe dot is coming out whether you want it to or not. The other 2 can be chain interrupted. Now we move on to the bridge, which has a guardian on it, and this is the first res point update in the dungeon. Up till now, any death will reset you to the start of the, and after this, any death will restart you to the, will put you at the start of the dungeon. But by killing this construct, it unlocks a skip where there's an NPC you can talk to at the start of the dungeon. It will fly you over to this point on the bridge. This guy is notable for this purification beam, where he casts a 360-degree beam, and you just need to spin around him to avoid it. this used to be a bigger deal on teaming because 2 of these constructs would spawn at the same time. And sometimes they would move in opposite directions with their purification beam and essentially guarantee that at some point they were going to intersect and hit you. And if you get hit by the purification beam, it leaves a nasty dot on you. So you really want to make an effort to not get hit by it. However, teaming has since been changed. There's now only ever one of these guys on the bridge, so the beam is not nearly as scary as it used to be. Now moving into this room, notable for having a ton of blobs that drop poison all over the ground. It will target ranged players, and it will spawn these green swirlies underneath the ranged players. And actually it may target everybody, but it's annoying for ranged players because typically groups like to pull a ton of these fluids at one time, meaning that you're going to have green spawns underneath your feet constantly. And if you stand in the poison that gets left by the green swirly, it will leave a dot on you that will stack the longer you stand in the green swirly, that slows you and does increasing damage. So standing in the green things is very bad. And as you can see, you can quickly run out of room when you have a bunch of the green swirlies spawning. So this, if you have a bunch of people in your group that need to be hard casting their spells, don't have a lot of instants, this becomes very challenging and annoying. But I believe each of these fluids can technically be pulled independently. I don't think they are leashed with each other, so you can kind of pick however big you want to go in this room. Now, as I said, I think most groups try to grab as many of these as they can, just kind of do the, you know, rip the band-aid off in one go. Just grab everything, and try your best to avoid standing in it. And poison dispels are nice in here, but if your group's lazy and stands in everything, then it doesn't really matter if you have poison dispels or not. There's probably gonna be more poisons that go out than there are dispels. As you can see from Shaq's health, this pull can get kind of nasty on necrotic. A lot of sources of being hit. And once the blobs are dead, then there are 2 mini bosses on. There's a mini boss on either side of the room here. And these mini bosses mimic one of the boss mechanics where they will entomb you in one of these tombs. It will put you in the tomb closest to the door on whichever side of the room you are closest to. So if you tank this boss over on this side of the room and you're closer to this side of the room than to this side of the room, then it'll always put you in this tomb, and you just walk up, and as soon as the player gets entombed, you just walk up, click it, and let them out. If, however, you were to take this mini boss and cut it on the other side of the room, and you were closer to the other tomb, then it would put you on this tomb on the other side of the room. Otherwise, this mini boss is very straightforward. And then you go over and do the same thing on the other side of the room. And kill this construct. And again, when he entombs right here, it'll always be in the tomb closest to the door. So as soon as you see someone getting entombed, just walk up and click that. You don't have to wait for them to rattle it or anything. You just go over and click it. Now this would be different from the boss itself. The boss itself could put the player in any of the 4 tombs when he entombs them. There's no way to know which. You have to wait for the player that gets entombed to press the new ability that they get when entombed, which will rattle the tomb and visually indicate to the group which tomb they've been placed in. Now this boss is probably the easiest of the bosses in here, but he's got a few mechanics you want to watch out for. The first of which is a burn corruption, where he will pick one of the players and place a patch of flame underneath them, a fairly large patch of flame. And it's easy to dodge and doesn't, like, it's not particularly threatening right now, but it does a lot of damage, like a lot of damage if you touch it. And the problem with burn corruption is that it's easy to avoid right now, but there's another mechanic, this drain fluid that's going out. Drain fluid, the boss channels on a player and does damage. And at the end of the drain fluid, he places a debuff on the player called, I think it's desiccation. And desiccation, so long as it's on the player, it causes them to move slow. It's a dot, but it also causes them to move more slowly. And when you combine desiccation with burn corruption, it gets particularly dangerous if the player with Desiccation is targeted by Burn Corruption. Unless they have a movement ability, they are probably not going to be fast enough to get out of the Burn Corruption. And so you see how big the patch is. They're not going to be fast enough to get out of the Burn Corruption patch. So like right here, this is the problem. If you get this Desiccation cast on you and then Burn Corruption underneath you, you need to have it healed off. The only way to get rid of Desiccation is to be healed above 90%. So if you don't get Desiccation removed from you and Burn Corruption is cast underneath you, and there you see Mitt was able to disengage out of it quickly. And that's about the only way, because I think he had... No, he didn't. He just did it to show off. So if you have a disengage like that with Desiccation, then you can get out of the Burn Corruption, but otherwise you're probably in trouble. So as a healer, you want to try to get rid of Desiccation on someone as soon as possible if they're drained. Otherwise, this boss will occasionally entomb someone. That entombed player will have a new ability on their bars that lets them rattle the tomb. And like you can see there, if you pay attention to this tomb, you'll be able to see it shake. And that's indicating, okay, that's the tomb they're in. You want to be very sure that you're clicking the correct tomb and not just guess wildly. Because if you click the incorrect tomb, it will spawn an ad that's dangerous. And you don't want one of those running around. So definitely make sure you know which tomb is the correct one to click. Don't just YOLO it. And otherwise, that's pretty much the fight. Just try to get rid of Desiccation as quickly as possible. Don't stand in the flame patches. Make sure you're clicking the correct tomb when the person gets entombed. And that finishes this boss. Now, this is King's Rest does not have much mob count in it, and of the most dungeons have quite a bit of trash that's optional to skip if you want to, but King's Rest, you have to clear almost the entire dungeon to be able to get the correct amount of mob count. So this is typically where we try to skip. We use a Rogue Shroud, and we skip through the first few packs. But additionally, we skip all the way to the... We won't be clearing any of this at any point, but we skip all the way to the third boss. We will be clearing this trash right here eventually. But for right now, this trash is very dangerous. And the spawn point right now is still at the start of the dungeon and will only fly you back to that bridge that I talked about earlier. So what we are trying to do now is skip to the third boss and kill the third boss, which will give you a new res point at the third boss, which makes this trash a lot less scary, because if it kills you, you just spawn right here. And you don't have to worry about running, like flying all the way back or any of that stuff. You just pop up here and you can jump right back into the fight. So now we're doing the third boss. And the third boss is actually 3 separate bosses that have an order that changes each week. So this week we start with the Axe mini boss. But as I said, some weeks it'll be the Totem boss, some weeks it'll be the big brute boss. So the Axe boss has 2 mechanics. The first is that she spawns these whirling axes underneath her, which create 2 axes that spin out, and they get further and further apart. Like they spin further out and out as they go. So you want to make sure that not only are they going in a circle, but they're also moving outward. You want to make sure that you've... it's best if you try to maintain a similar spawn point for all the axes so that there's a safe spot. Like technically, if you stood the boss in the middle the whole time and kept spawning the axes at the same point, it would always be safe to stand in the middle, so long as she's not in the process of spawning those axes, because the axes are always going to spin outward. So this would always be a safe spot. The other mechanic, and the more dangerous one on this fight, is this debuff that you can see on Flawless right now called Severing Axe. This will randomly target one of the DPS or healer, and it will put a long duration debuff on the target that does a ton of damage. You can technically avoid it if you have like an evasion or a guaranteed dodge ability, but there's not necessarily there's no way to know who the axe is going to go on. So you just have to YOLO it. If you wanted to try to dodge the axe, you'd have to use a dodge ability right as she's getting ready to cast it and just hope that she casted on you. After you kill that boss, then you get the next boss in the order. And for us, this is Akali the Conqueror, which is the big hitter. After you've killed the first boss, in this case, the axe boss, she continues to leave the axes out on the ground. So you'll still have to deal with the swirling axes for the rest of the fight. For this boss, Akali, there are every boss has two mechanics. This boss, the two mechanics are that occasionally she will debuff someone, and after a period of time, she will charge that person. And if you are the person that's charged, you're going to take a ton of damage. But she split the damage with anyone that gets hit in the path as she charges. So you want to have people stack up between you and the boss and soak that damage with you. Unless you're someone that can totally avoid the damage, like if you can pop evasion or something and dodge it completely, you could soak one of those by yourself. But otherwise, if you're not a class that can like immune it or do something like that, then you want to have people standing in line with you to split it. Then the other ability that she does is that she does a backhand on the tank, and it can be dodged or parried, but if it hits you, it'll leave this debuff on here that causes you to take 200% increased physical damage. So you want to be, as a tank, if you get that debuff, you want to start kiting. You definitely are not trying to face tank the boss at that point. It will screw you up very quickly. So if you get that if you're not able to avoid that debuff, then you want to start kiting and just staying away from the boss until it falls off. When that boss dies, when that mini boss dies, then that boss's ability for the rest of the fight is that she will occasionally spawn around the room and put that debuff up and charge someone. So throughout the rest of the fight, there will be points where you'll see someone get the debuff, and they'll need to look around and identify where the mini boss or where that brute boss is, and then tell people to stack in the line with it. So you'll have to swivel your camera around pretty quickly when you see that debuff come out and start trying to figure out where you're going to be soaking. Now, this last boss has two abilities: the Poison Nova that's cast here, and this just needs to be interrupted or it does a ton of AoE damage. It puts a big AoE dot on the group. So you just want to wait for as long as you can into the cast to interrupt it. Then Call Elements comes out. Call Elements places 4 totems around the room, the most important of which is this explosive totem. If that one is allowed to cast, it will do a huge AoE damage and probably wipe your group. Then there's also probably the second most important one is Earth Wall, which places a big absorb on the boss. So you want to kill that, or else you have to keep dispelling the boss. This, by the way, this mark is indicating that the other boss has spawned and we now need to soak. As you can see, it does a ton of damage to you if you don't get many soaks on it. There are 2 other totems that spawn as well. One that does a periodic group interrupt. When that totem goes off, it will do an AoE interrupt on the group. If you're casting, it'll lock you out. And then the last one spawns swirlies all over the ground that you just have to move out of. It's not particularly dangerous, just kind of annoying. So this boss basically just wait for as long as possible to dispel Poison Nova, and then when Call of the Elements comes out, you're going to want to knock down the explosive totem first, then probably the Earth Wall totem, and then if you want to, you can kill the Interrupt totem and the Swirly totem. But as you can see, these Swirlies are not exactly like they're not even spawned under players necessarily. They can spawn anywhere, so you could go through that whole phase and never really have to deal with the Swirly totem if you wanted to. And the group interrupt one is just it doesn't do its interrupt frequently enough to really be that devastating. So if you just pay attention to when it's going to go off, you can avoid killing that totem and just stop your cast right as it's about to go off. Now, once this boss is dead, it resets the res point in this room, which is very helpful for this trash because this is by far the most dangerous trash in here. Particularly these berserkers. These berserkers are notable because they put this buff right here, or this debuff right here, the severing blade, I think, or severing something. And that dot does a ton of damage, and it gets cast on anyone in melee range, even a little beyond melee range. It'll target the tank if the tank is in melee range, but if the tank is not in melee range, then it'll target someone else that's in melee range, and you definitely don't want someone else targeted by it because it will almost certainly kill that person. But it does an incredible amount of damage to the tank. And if you have two berserkers like you did on that pull, and they both put Severing Blade on the tank will take a ton of damage. So this is a very dangerous pull, and can very easily go poorly, which is why you want to have your res set in this room so that if you die, you just pop back up and run up here instantly. Now this next pack again features a berserker, and this is the dangerous part here. So this berserker occasionally jumps, and this is the dangerous situation right here. When this berserker's out here by himself and the tank is in this pile, the tank is no longer close enough to get the Severing Blade on him. So anyone within range of this berserker now, which I said melee, but I think it's actually more like 5 or 10 yards. Anyone within range of this berserker now is an eligible target for the Severing Blade debuff. And if you get that debuff on you as a DPS, it's nearly a death sentence on higher keys. So you want to be very careful when you see that berserker jump out by itself. Otherwise, the mobs in this pack, there's, you know, a few things that need to be interrupted, but nothing too crazy. Mostly just, you know, the group needs to be on top of its interrupts. But as you can see here, like Flawless here got the Severing Blade debuff. The berserker was out here, the tank wasn't close enough to take it, so Flawless gets that debuff. You can see what it's doing to his health, like he's just getting shredded by it. So you want to be very careful. If you are standing close to the berserker, you want to make sure the tank is also close to the berserker. You don't want to be alone with it. And occasionally this Healing Tide will get, this totem will get placed by the Witch Doctor. You want to make sure to knock that down quickly. Now there's a Brute that patrols up and down this bridge. This guy's not too dangerous, but he is very annoying because he casts this enormous AoE around him. If you are inside of it, it will knock you up until you hit the roof. There are some parts of this map where the roof is not, like right now, this is in the doorway. The top of the door is right above you, so if you were to get knocked up by that, you would just hit the door and fall back down, which probably would not kill you. But like out on the bridge, the ceiling of that zone is like several hundred yards in the air. So if you get knocked up, or like out here, if you get knocked up into the ceiling, you go way up and you will definitely die to falling damage on the way back down, unless you have a way like a Shadow Step or a Wild Charge or some way to port or a blink or something to reset your falling distance. The other notable mob in this trash is this Beastmaster. If you have like a DK that can control undead, this Beastmaster is a very valuable ally. If you want to take control of the Beastmaster, it does a ton of damage. If you can't take control of the Beastmaster, it does an ability called Poison Barrage, which targets one player and then shoots a conal attack at that player. And anyone in that cone gets a big poison debuff placed on them. So the idea is if you're targeted by the Poison Barrage and you have no way to interrupt it as a group, then the person who gets Poison Barrage needs to stand away from the rest of the group so that no one else is hit by it. And then ideally you have a poison dispel for that player and you can get rid of the dot. If you can't get rid of the dot, it's going to hurt a lot. But I believe it can also be LOS'd. And if you want to try to LOS the Poison Barrage, then that's you can do that and avoid getting drilled by it. So it's ideal if you can interrupt the Beastmaster frequently, but if you can't, there are ways to deal with the dot that aren't terrible. And again, you got the Berserker. You want to make sure that you're being careful with that Severing Blade. Now, and this can be a godsend as well. You'll notice right here, the Berserker jumps out and casts Severing Blade instantly. And you'll notice that nobody got Severing Blade. But then you'll notice Marv's pet, this health bar, drops rather precipitously. Pets can take that dot. So if you're good with your pet control, you could send your pet in when that Berserker jumps out. You could send your pet in and have your pet be the sacrificial lamb and take that Severing Blade for you, which is obviously like here you can see Flawless with the Severing Blade here. Even when there's nothing else happening, it's really hard to keep that person alive. And then the last big and most dangerous trash mob in here is Shadow of Zool. This guy's been nerfed a few times, but he still hurts quite a bit. He casts a Shadow Barrage repeatedly on one target. Ideally, you'd like it to be your tank. And it's just going to do a ton of shadow damage. You have to spam the tank. There's two other mechanics he does. He places this Dark Revelation on someone. This will do damage to the group but it'll be fall off damage. So the further out you are, the less damage it does to everyone. And then when it explodes, it will pop out one of those void creatures from earlier in the dungeon. That needs to be dispelled to get rid of it instantly, or it'll do the same thing and run. If it'll run around, and if it touches anyone, it will fear them. The other mechanic is a circle on the ground that's supposed to be soaked, or else it pulses and does damage to the group. But the range on that circle on the ground is very small, like maybe 10 or 15 yards. So unless it spawns like literally right next to melee, you could probably just have everyone move away from it and ignore it. Otherwise, yeah, there's going to be a ton of healing required on the tank to survive Shadow of Azul. You also notice earlier in the fight, for instance, Flawless picked up one of the stacks of this Shadow Barrage, and that does a ton of damage to any non-tank here, so not recommended to have someone else try to soak that tank mechanic. The boss can be knocked, so there are ways to interrupt the Shadow Barrage if you absolutely have to, but he chain casts it over and over and over, so you're not going to be able to lock it down the whole fight. And then once this mini boss is dead, then you go on to Dazar. And Dazar has a few mechanics. The first of which will be the Gust that he casts. Or Gale Slash, not Gust, Gale Slash. Gale Slash targets a player and then sends out a tornado to their location. And then that tornado will spin around the room on that same... It'll stay at the same sort of, whatever you call that, distance from the wall, and then spin around the room on that same track the whole time. And depending on whether he casts it to his right or left, that will determine which direction the tornado spawns. Then the other mechanic he has is this Quaking Leap, which is similar to the thing on Shadow of Azul, where it does fall off damage to your party, so you want to make sure you get that away from the group when he jumps out. And as you can see here, you can you take less damage the further out you are from it, so he'll jump here when he casts it. Like I get it, and as his cast finishes, he jumps to me, and then I jump to where he was, and I'm further from him. Then you have a window there where he's gonna jump to your point, and you have a little bit of a window to get away from that spot. And if you can get away from that spot, you take less damage from it too. So you want to get that as far away from other people and yourself as you can. And then after he hits, I think it was like 75%, he summons an another dinosaur that does a similar mechanic to the raptors in the mini boss room, where this thing is going to jump around and slash in front of it. You just don't be in front of it when it starts slashing. And this raptor has an independent health pool. It needs to be killed quickly. But then when Dazar hits 60%, he summons his mount. And this mount does an AoE fear. It's really annoying. This deadly roar, there's really no way to avoid it except to LOS it, which is hard to do in a circular room. But it shares a health pool with Dazar, and it disappears from the fight when you hit whatever it is. Or no, excuse me, it doesn't share a health pool. It can be I swear to God, at one point it did share a health pool. I don't know. I'm making stuff up now. Anyway, it needs to be killed quickly to get rid of that deadly roar. And then once it's dead, you're just gonna be burning Dazar, and he starts doing his spear stuff. Like up to this point, you're still just dealing with Quaking Leap and with Gale Slash. But I think when he hits 40%, he starts in with the spears. And the spears, then there's two different spear phases. The first is that he spawns spears in columns around the room, and you just need to be between those columns. So this is pretty easy to avoid right now. But then he will at a certain point spawn a column of spears that moves continuously around the room. Now that column of spears always gets placed at the same spot. It will always spawn for the first time at this point in the room, which is like the northern, like the straight north in the room, it will always spawn at the north part of the room, and then it'll move clockwise around the room from that. So by around the time that you're killing his mount, you want to have Dizar slightly west of the northernmost part of the room, so that the spears will just spawn on the other side of you and then move around the room, and then you just move over a little bit, and then you never have to worry about that column of spears. It'll stop right over here. Like right here, it's getting ready to stop. And then the mechanic just restarts. So right there, and so now all you did was move, you know, a few feet over. And now it goes back to its clustered phase. And then hopefully the boss is dead before it starts doing the sweeping spear thing again. And there you go. That is King's Rest. Good luck.